Hi, welcome to More Systems, Fewer Silos, addressing complexity with a localized whole community approach. And that's what we have observed as being essential for the systemic collaboration that's needed for social, environmental, and economic well-being. My name is Brenda Herchmer, and I'm the founder and principal collaborator of Campus for Communities of the Future. If you're viewing this video, it's quite likely that you too are seeing that social, economic, and environmental well-being are intrinsically linked, and that a holistic approach for addressing complex local and global issues and opportunities is required. What we intend to share is what we've learned over a lot of years as clear solutions for moving forward. So in this video, we're going to share future directions for social innovation, cross-sector solutions, and system-wide collaboration. Some very practical strategies and how-tos and tools for how to do that. Well, I'm not sure how much you need to know about me or what you want to know about me, but it's probably important to note that I've experienced in a lot of different sectors and silos, and that's proven very useful. But don't be fooled by the recognition that I was very privileged to have as a YWCA woman of distinction, because at one conference I was introduced by a very nervous young woman, and instead of introducing me as a woman of distinction, she introduced me as a woman of dysfunction, and sometimes I think that might be a more accurate description. The innovation and the transformative change that's needed in these challenging times, it's complicated. And while we have used our collective learnings, primarily gathered from observing what was working in many communities across the country, to develop a process and how-tos and tools, it is ultimately pretty challenging to convey. So I went back to a training and communications model that I've used previously. Hopefully this might be useful to you as well. But in my experience, these steps are the best way to facilitate any learning and communication style. So it's pretty simple, but it seems to work. So it really begins with the why, moves to the what, the how-to, and then the what if. And I think what makes this work is that too often we feel pressure to focus on the what are you doing and how are you doing it, and we forget about being able to share why it's important in the first place. And I know I did a lot of that in my early parts of my career until I learned that that didn't always work. And I think the other thing is the fourth step, which is really about, okay, what if? Like, now that you know the why and the what and the how, what if you apply it? And that can open a lot of doors. So I hope that that is part of what you consider as you continue to watch this video. So I've added more detail for each of these four steps, and I'm going to start with the beginning, of course, with the why, and then move through the other three stages. Now, I am doing it at a very high level, but that's just really about giving you and ensuring that you have the picture on the top of the puzzle box. So why this very complicated journey? The reality is that it was things we learned along the way in our respective careers. We learned that our systems are failing to meet expectations. No surprise, I'm sure, to you. I think every meeting that I went to for many years, one or more people said, our systems are broken. That was part of it. We also did learn through our experience that complex issues are often best localized. There is wisdom at the roots. And it's interesting to note that the United Nations, World Health, and the World Economic Forum is coming to that same conclusion. They've recognized that up to 65% of the world's most pressing issues, like the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, are not going to be achieved. 65% of them are not going to be achieved unless we localize. So again, that was the impetus for a lot of this work. We learned that multi-sector collaboration across sectors and silos, it's critical. And it works because the more diverse the mix, the better the fix ends up being. We also learned that a leader's job is shifting. We've been taught that we are the ones that need to solve the problems, but in complex times such as these, it's much more about putting a process into place so that all voices can be heard. And lastly, the transformative innovation and impact across sectors, we also learned that it doesn't happen a lot of times because it's no one's job to do it. So it's much more likely to occur when there are neutral catalysts involved. So that's part of the context. This This one slide provides a summary of what we learned about collaboration as a result of 20 years of working with communities across the country. It's a kind of collaboration that might be different from what you've experienced to date, but it has proven critical for not only responding to complex issues and opportunities, but also for helping a community to become more future ready. So this particular collaboration framework began with one of many conversations I had a lot of years ago with a futurist in North Carolina by the name of Rick Smyer. So one of the first things Rick said to me was, "Brenda, you do know that there are two kinds of change?" And I said, "No." So he proceeded to explain that there's change and innovation that reforms, and there's change and innovation that transforms. And when I integrated the learning about change that reforms and change that transforms with what I had learned about collaboration and partnerships, being that all change needs to be rooted in networking and trust building, it became very clear that there's more than one kind of collaboration, and that most of the collaboration and innovation we were doing really fell into change that reforms. So yes, when you look at the lower parts of the pyramid, cooperation and traditional collaboration for sure remain important because it is about increasing efficiency and effectiveness. But we also have moved into doing more collective impact, which can get us to change and innovation that transforms, because that's when multiple organizations from different sectors come together to address a specific issue. But what we learned from communities and neighborhoods is that we need something more for transformative change and innovation. It is systemic whole community collaboration, because what we learned by observing is that the potential for transformative innovation is increased when government, social purpose organizations, businesses, and individual community members, those who have lived experience, and the proximate or local leaders come together to identify not only their needs but their assets, and in doing so can address multi-sector, interconnected, complex issues and opportunities. It really is a kind of collaboration across differences, and it contributes to more impactful collaboration and better informed decision making. So here's the reality. This is not going to be a surprise to any of you watching this video. The challenges that we're facing today are, and not to mention the opportunities, because a lot of times we forget that there's a lot of good things happening in our communities too. They're pretty complicated. And I don't doubt at all that any one of you will look at these issues and agree that they are critical, and a lot of them are at a crisis stage, likely in your community or your neighborhood. So, the why really is that we want to ensure and balance social, economic, and environmental well-being. These days, too much of our emphasis is placed on the economy and in business interests, and we need to ensure greater balance. We want to amplify innovation. We want to ensure, and this is what we're seeing as a result of this process, we're seeing now more informed policy and decision-making. Right out of the gate with this process, you will see what is essential, and that's increased trust and collaboration among stakeholders. And for us, the stakeholders are citizens, businesses, government, social purpose organizations. That whole mix is what is essential for transformative solutions. And we also, we do know that it is when communities are resilient and responsive, that's when they're able to respond to issues and opportunities. That's the kind of impact that we want to see. And I think, I think we did observe that much of the innovative and transformative work that has and is being done is the result of intersectoral or interdisciplinary initiatives. And as this new discipline of whole community or sector connectors emerges and gains traction, we're finding that similar work is often known by many other names. And so it's really about work, and what we're really sharing is about work that creates an awareness of the essential whole community work that's being done under different names and needing to be acknowledged and coordinated. And so this slide, and I've just been collecting the names every time I hear someone talking about work that is similar to what we're doing with a whole community approach, or a complete community approach, I just add the name to this slide, and those names are growing. So keep your ear to the ground and look for other people doing this same kind of work, maybe under a different name. What we also observed was that the leaders, with or without a formal title, was being done by those who were described by different names. And I think that as well has contributed to some confusion. So we're hearing words like field catalysts. The Skoll Foundation is referring to them as system orchestrators, community weavers, system catalysts, networking facilitators, all kinds of names. I know in our work, and we're not married to the name either, we use the term sector connectors to describe this kind of leadership. We really only use that because it seemed to be understood by the people that we were dealing with. You may or may not have heard of the 17 SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They were developed in 2015 to get consensus for what were and what are the world's most pressing global issues. They were developed at the global level, but they impact all of us locally because it's all interconnected. And the reason I wanted to share this, there's actually two reasons. One is that we can be very proud that the Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray, is responsible, as part of his committee portfolio, he's responsible for the 17 SDGs. But in terms of its relationship to you, what's important is that this provides an amazing framework for looking holistically and helping others look holistically at their own communities or neighborhoods. It connects locally to the global issues. And of course, the way we do it, the indicators are going to be different. But I think that's just that there is a framework, and I think that reduces a lot of the confusion in terms of where we can start. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I am a member of the Canada chapter of a global organization that is dealing with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the social innovation that's going to be needed to achieve them. But when I first applied to the organization, we had to be vetted, and one of the things they ask us is, what goal is it that you're most interested in? Well, I'm interested in a lot of them, but for me it was kind of a no-brainer in the sense that I don't know that any one of us or any one of our sectors or silos are going to be able to deal with any of these on our own, because it's all interlinked. Each of these 17 goals is related in some way to another, and it does require extensive systemic collaboration at all levels. And I don't think we can do it without 17, which is partnerships and collaborations for the goals. So again, just another way of looking at why it's so important to be thinking and doing as it relates to our communities from a whole perspective, a complete perspective. These sustainable development goals are really critical because they do provide this shared language. Not only that, it's a simpler way, I think, and less intimidating way to address the complexity that we're all facing. But I think it's a really important opportunity as well to engage new and diverse stakeholders, and the citizens and residents and youth as well, just as two examples. It also can lead to new sources of funding, bringing in new partners, and it does also bring potential for scaling beyond the local level. When we have this framework, we can better address policy, funding, promising practices, and peer-to-peer sharing as well. One of the ways, and I'm not going to introduce a lot of tools until a little bit later, but this tool is really important for what we've been talking about, which is the why. And the why is really about needing to think about our communities or neighborhoods from a whole community or whole neighborhood perspective. And so one of the most important tools that we've used is really looking at everything that impacts our capacity for well-being, economic, environmental, and social. And so we have this tool, which is a report card. A lot of our communities that we worked with helped us shape it. It remains a work in progress, but it does look at everything that impacts us at the local level: our economy, our health, our environment, our culture, our social environment. And these indicators are different than what we might see with the 17 SDGs, but we've layered them here as well. All of this is an answer to the why, and it helps people understand why we can't stick where we are because it's a system that simply is no longer working. We need a system that looks at our whole community. If not, we're going to end up with this. And I love this cartoon because I think it really explains in a concise way what we're all up against. Everything, it's not balanced, because so much of what we do and prioritize, I heard someone say the other day that we have a monoculture that is focused on business interests, and everything else is on the other end of the scale. So somehow we need to provide more balance, and that's ultimately why this is so important. So, and you can see, and I didn't mention it earlier, but you can see as I change slides, I'm moving to the step in that communication model. So we've gone from the why, and now we're talking about what. What are communities doing to motivate, mobilize, maximize, and maintain? So here's the what. This is kind of at a higher level, and then we'll get to the how-to. The second quadrant focuses on the what. What practices were determined to be critical for mobilizing innovation and transformative change? So this was really us observing what worked. The first was a community-led development approach, which we've talked about. Second was this big picture systemic collaboration piece that needed to be in place, so moving across different silos and disciplines. The third was strategic foresight. The fourth was digital optimization. And the fifth practice was really about ensuring this neutral cohort of sector connectors who were able to bring everyone together. So we're going to talk about each of these in a little bit of detail. The first we mentioned was community-led development. And what we did see is that we had to mobilize the community if we were going to maximize the community. It's that community-led development that builds on the foundation of trusted relationships and a sense of belonging. It facilitates the integrated and the cross-sectoral process that is critical. And it's this that actually contributes to agility and mesh work and creates, I think, probably one of the most important impacts, and that's the citizen engagement and the ownership of the actions. And that's what drives the vital, resilient communities. So that community development piece is critical. The second was systems thinking, and I'm not sure that historically that it was ever as important as it is right now. And by that I mean it's more clear that we need to think about our communities more holistically if we're going to better understand how to put those pieces together. So this system thinking, and by way of example, that would be using a tool like our community checkup, our community report card. When you provide that framework for understanding the big picture, you can see the whole and you can begin to see the interconnections. And I think it's this that does most to uncover the root causes and the solutions for the complicated issues. And I think this system thinking gives us new lenses and generates new ways of thinking and creativity and more innovative, transformative approaches. Strategic foresight. And I must say this came to me a little bit later in my career, and it's when I came to become part of a whole network of community futurists. And that I to be honest, I didn't even know there was a field of study about strategic foresight and future-focused thinking. But this is a piece that's more important than ever because it helps us develop new paths for shaping better outcomes and being better prepared for what clearly is an uncertain future. It helps us to see that change comes both from the world and from ourselves. So I think when you apply strategic foresight, you're promoting anticipation and readiness for both unexpected and expected global and local changes. So that's part of the equation for sure. And then of course digital optimization and using technology to increase efficiency that contributes to the greater whole and more efficiency and effectiveness, much greater impact because we can be more efficient by using technology. So ultimately, we were able to take our observations and the essential practices that were revealed and then put them together in a way that could be understood and replicated by others. Ultimately, it did evolve as 4 pathways. So when you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the first pathway in the orange bubble. And we knew that where success happened, it was because there were these impact catalysts, the sector connectors. And so what we realized is that we needed to provide a kind of coaching of the coaches that would share the learning and the knowledge and exchange that to help build that capacity for the collective leadership that was needed for innovation and transformation. So ultimately, that was path one. It was about the leadership. That was the only thing that the 60 some odd communities that we worked with, the only thing that they had in common was that strong local leadership. And then what we learned resulted and what led to advancing hope and trusted relationships among all of the stakeholders was the importance of the quick success projects, or low-hanging fruit, that used a stakeholder or community-led approach. So these were our collaborative quick success projects, and honestly, it didn't really matter what it was. I'm going to show you a few examples. It didn't really matter what it was, because the outcome that was critical was the hope and the relationships, and what a community learned when they came to consensus about what was important, and then they all put their shoulder to the wheel and pushed in the same direction. So that quick success, there is still very much a place for projects. But then what happened in almost every case when a project was completed, the people that were involved turned to one another and said, okay, what's next? And that led to a readiness and a willingness to tackle more systemic collaboration and the transformational change that was important for the more complicated challenges. And ultimately, those first three paths led to a different kind of culture that really reinforced and supported actions for sustainable growth. And that's what led to the impact that was so important for every community and neighborhood. And it was really about individual, social, economic, and environmental well-being. It created much greater balance between all of those. It did amplify innovation. We got more informed decision-making. We saw increased trust. And the trust that was important was that because it was between citizens and businesses and government and social purpose organizations. And in some cases, the result for some of these communities and neighborhoods was new revenue streams. So here's some examples of the kind of projects that were initiated by the cohort, the local cohort of leaders who served as these neutral conveners, these impact catalysts, these system orchestrators, these sector connectors, whatever we call them. This is an example of one of the first communities I ended up working with, and it was quite eclectic, in terms of the makeup of that cohort. I mean, they were three well-respected people in the community. This was a very small community. I think the population was about 800. But there was a banker and a rancher and a retired school teacher who brought this all together. And their first quick success project was a rebuild of a community park that was smack dab in the middle of their downtown core. They knew that it was rather sad looking and that it needed to become more prominent and more utilized. And so they treated it like a barn raising bee. And within 6 weeks, they had raised $117,000 and did some advance work. They had some in-kind contributions. They did some advance work. And then in one day, they built this playground. They added a beach volleyball court. They cleaned up the arena. They planted plants. They built an outdoor picnic area. And that happened in one day. And then they took off from there. But the other examples, it was really a case, I think, in a lot of times of thinking big but acting small. So we saw examples of outdoor gardens. We saw one community that had the amazing fortune of getting donated greenhouses. In London, we saw outdoor movies in outdoor parks in different neighborhoods. We saw, during COVID, we saw porch concerts. We saw tree plantings. We saw repair cafes. And again, didn't really matter what it was. It was just something, whatever it was, there was consensus from the community. And that brought people, and because they, I guess because they were also part of the decision making, they owned the consensus, they owned the solution, and they were excited about that. So that's what made a difference. And once those small projects happened, we started to see the broader systems collaboration. In one case, it was Sangudo. Sangudo developed an opportunity development co-op because they realized they had to take responsibility for drawing new businesses and supporting new businesses in their community. So they had in local residents and businesses invest in an opportunity co-op that attracted and supported new businesses in the area. We saw communities where there was more neighborhood decision making in larger communities. We saw new businesses supported. We saw the first green energy co-op developed in one of the provinces in Canada. So, these were more complicated initiatives, but when you have that trust as a starting off place, it worked extraordinarily well. So we'll move into the third step, which is the how. How does this happen? It can sound overwhelming, but it is about the process, the tools, and the resources that supports and coaches the local community or neighborhood to motivate, mobilize, maximize, and maintain. So how did they do it? How is it supported and coached? One of the things that we dug into very early on in our learning process was that there was a need to address planning, because in our assessment and with the feedback that we received from the communities we were working with, there's a great deal of confusion about the planning process, the approach to planning, as well as how to engage stakeholders and stakeholders meaning the citizens in a lot of cases, and ensure that they had the power that was important for being able to take ownership and accomplish what they envisioned as being really critical. So if you look at it, I don't know that we don't really have time to explain each of these, but I think what's really important is if you want to maintain the status quo, it's traditional planning. If you want change that reforms, it often is rooted in conflict-driven social action. If it's innovative change to transform, community development needs to be in place. And if you want comprehensive community transformation, that's what we're referring to as a whole community approach. And that's where we see also a change in stakeholder and citizen power, where citizens and all the other stakeholders engaged embrace responsibility and work collaboratively to move their priorities forward. We've talked about the report card. That is almost in every case the most important starting point. We're gently nudging people to become system thinkers in terms of thinking about their own community, which most people really get into. They find it very interesting. After all, it is their community. We have a community development, a community-led planning framework. Generally, a traditional planning process starts at step 6, not always, but generally. And what we observed were 5 additional steps 1 through 5, which were all about engaging stakeholders and engaging them in the process, but also tapping into their knowledge about their own community, what worked, what didn't work, and how do we fix it. So this planning framework works in pretty much any initiative, but it is essential for community-led planning initiatives and the more comprehensive whole community planning as well. With it comes a community development planning workbook. We tried to make this as easy as possible by explaining each step, and each step it's almost like a tab on a recipe book, and behind the tab you can find a variety of recipes, but in our case it's a variety of different tools and techniques. So I think in total we probably have 250, 300 different tools spread among those 10 tabs or those 10 steps in the community development planning framework, and then you can design your own process or the actual sector connectors, the local leaders who are the catalysts for the change, design it and implement it with coaches on the side. So it is, what contributed to this success? Well, this is a little more of an explanation about the role of sector connectors, because they are the ones who amplify the collaboration. We found that the reason why we weren't bringing together citizens, or what we call the consumer sector, why aren't we bringing them together with the social purpose sector and the government sector and the business sector? And we realized that is it because typically it's no one's job to do that, to call the meeting and to be the neutral catalyst for bringing everyone together. And it's the sector connectors who amplify that collaboration. So that's a key part of the process. What is a sector connector? Well, that's explained in more detail, but it does have this amazing ripple effect, and that's what makes its success travel. A little bit more about the role of the sector connector. It's one of the things that we do at Campus for Communities of the Future, is that we support and provide learning for the sector connectors, for those neutral catalysts, to not only help them understand the role, but also to ensure that they have the tools and resources that they need. We do know that the leadership is the one common denominator of every community and neighborhood that has been successful. So that's what contributes to the success, investing in growing leadership at all levels. We see these sector connectors who are using an applied community-led development approach in different roles. And here's just an example of a resource that shows you what that support can be about. We also know that the leadership is about 8 different competencies, and it looks rather, it seems like it's easy now, but it took a long time to get to this point because we could not find an assessment that really spoke to community leadership. Most of the assessments were corporate in nature or government, and so we developed this as a result of working with many communities and focus groups across Canada. And we asked them, what do you see in your leaders that it is working, or what do you think is needed and might be missing? So it evolved to become 8 competencies, and each of these competencies has indicators, and we use it to measure on a pre and post basis, because leadership is the only common denominator we saw of the communities that were doing well. We also know that organizations themselves have to have capacity. We have a lot of capacity sometimes for working internally, but not as much for working externally. So this is an assessment tool for assessing an organization's capacity for innovation and transformation. And this reflects and talks about the same the competencies for leadership as well as the competencies for working externally. And that probably is the difference, is that we do focus a lot on the internal capacity building in our leadership development work and our organizational work. And more than anything, our tools and resources are about how do you work externally? How do you go into your community, open the door from your office, step into the community, and how do you support one another? And so one is internal capacity building and as well as competencies for external capacity building. Lots of tools. This is a tool for organizational capacity for innovation and transformation, 10 different competencies, and not exactly KPIs, but indicators for sure. And it's, again, used as an assessment tool as well, because a lot of times there's things that an organization is doing well and they need to be aware of. I know you're aware that transformative change and innovation is complicated. And as you can see from the cartoon, the complexity path, it's not a crowded one, but it is the reality of the kind of change that we need for a better and brighter future. And it needs more people like you who are willing to take the less traveled path. So we're in the 4th quadrant, what if. Don't worry, it is a short one. But it's really a case of saying, what if? What if we took these kind of learnings and applied them to our neighborhood, to our community? What if you did that? And what I would like to suggest, it's really about your own next steps. I'm going to share an example. In this case, it's the next steps for our own work with Campus for Communities of the Future, as well as the Catalyst Now Canadian network, or our chapter of members. It's what we are beginning to work on. And so in our case, it is about establishing pilot communities finding the funding to be able to do that. It's about developing a sector connectors community of practice for individuals like you who might be interested in connecting with others to learn and grow together on this less crowded path. It's also about establishing a measurement process so that we will have data to prove our impact in supporting different neighborhoods and communities. And it's about a micro-credentialed certificate course. So that's our what if. So the way we have articulated our own what if is in the form of a theory of change. This is one fabulous tool, but there are many others that would help you try to think of this in terms of the context, the activities, the outputs, the outcomes, and how you're going to make a difference. And so this is what we did in this case. So this is really just an example for you. So that's it, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time and your attention. If you're interested in learning more, if you're interested in becoming a part of our community of practice and or learning about upcoming opportunities for neighborhoods and communities, please stay in touch. The best way to do that is actually to link in through my LinkedIn page, and because that's where we actually post a lot of our announcements. So thank you again for your time and your attention, and hope to talk soon. Bye for now.